Now, the National Transmission Company South Africa officially launched on Monday, marking a significant step towards forming a reformed electricity supply industry. The NTCSA is set to transmit electricity across the country, with government hoping this will act as a catalyst for much needed improvements and upgrades within the national electricity transmission infrastructure. Brian Day, chairman of the South African Independent Power Producers Association, joins us now with more insights. Brian, thanks so much for your time today. Now, as we get started, that unbundling of Eskom has begun. We've seen the launch of the National Transmission Company South Africa. Right at the top, take us through what that move means and how it's a step forward to liberalizing the local electricity market.
Yes, this is a fundamental shift in the structure of the electricity supply industry. For over 100 years, Eskom has been what's called a fully integrated vertical utility, where all aspects of the value chain sat in one organization: generation, transmission, and distribution. There was no optionality in terms of who you bought your electricity from. You simply had an electricity supply agreement, either directly with Eskom or for smaller users potentially inside a municipality. The unbundling of Eskom's National Transmission Company of South Africa, as it is called, and that is also underpinned now by the legislation, the Electricity Regulation Act, which has been signed into law earlier this year and will be implemented very soon, I believe, by the President, really sets the National Transmission Company of South Africa as a separate, for now, subsidiary of Eskom Holdings. This entails three main components of this entity, being the grid itself, so it's the transmission infrastructure, it's the system operator, which is very well known to many South Africans. They're the ones that control load shedding and all of the other things that go behind which power generation plants are on the grid, how much of what is needed when, all of that, a very technical system, and as well as the market operator. And it's really in terms of the market operator that's going to have the biggest effect on buyers and sellers of electricity in South Africa.
I want us to bring in the independent power producers into the conversation now, Brian. How does this development, enable IPPs to participate in what will be known as a liberalized electricity market?
So what's going to happen, and while the NTCSA has been operational since the 1st of July, and there's just been the launch now with the minister and the chairman of Eskom and the chairperson of the NTCSA, all of the dignitaries. It's really only going to be next year sometime, once the market codes have been finalized and implemented, that you will actually start to have realistic trading happening. But what's going to happen for independent power producers is, instead of having to sign up a offtake agreement with a single or perhaps one or two large off-takers, some of the big companies that have run programs like this, the Anglos, the Sasol's, the Tronox, the Exxaris Energy, etc., there's going to be an opportunity to build a plant, what some people call a merchant plant, to fund it and then simply bid that power on the day-ahead market, which will be implemented next year. That's the beginnings of the market in terms of the wholesale electricity. It also means that buyers of electricity are going to have an opportunity to either stick with the fixed contracts like they've got at the moment, or to become market participants, and then also to actually participate in that market and to put in their bids of how much energy they need when, and to allow the prices to then be set according to the market mechanism.
You know, Brian, there's been concerns around grid capacity and whether there's enough financial muscle to expand the grid for more renewable projects, to bring more renewable projects online. Is the industry confident enough that the NTC can pull this off?
I think there's growing confidence. I think the amount of grid construction and build out over the last 5-10 years has been too low. There is, however, significant work being done. There are already something like 16 gigawatts of additional projects that are in what's called the budget quote process. So that's the final technical and commercial arrangements with the NTCSA to actually secure such grid connection. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, NERSA needs to approve and finalize the curtailment rules, which will release something like 3.5 gigawatts in the Western Cape and in the Eastern Cape. NTCSA is also working very hard to speed up the necessary modifications and new capacity construction as the medium-term solution. And in the long term, Treasury specifically is working with the World Bank to put a guarantee system in place so that they can procure large amounts of additional grid capacity, both the lines and the substations, through private sector participation. That, however, is probably a few years off, but we are expecting announcements from Treasury, even potentially from the Minister of Finance, in the October midterm budget review.
Let's talk more about that private sector participation. Earlier this year, Minister Ramokgopa expressed confidence in private sector interest in transmission assets. From your perspective, are these, or rather, is this optimism justified?
Yes, it is. I think Minister Ramokgopa is doing an outstanding job in fact, Monday last week, he engaged with, it was 200 or 300 people from industry and really came to us with an open heart and open mind, in his words, to say, what should we be doing differently? And the reality is that as long as you get the appropriate risk allocation between the NTCSA and the private sector, and there's some sort of guarantee in the process without encumbering the balance sheet of the sovereign, as in the nation, it very definitely can work. But that's where all the detailed hard work is being done at the moment. And along with Minister Ramokgopa, his deputy and the whole department.
And is the current regulatory environment, Brian, encouraging? Do they support, let's say, wheeling and perhaps what's been dubbed as the future grid?
There's still a lot of challenges. So yeah. I'm much more positive that we're moving in the right direction. The Electricity Regulation Act Amendment Bill having been signed, that's now an act, no longer a bill. The unbundling of the NTCSA and the launch that we had in the last few days. The type of engagement from Minister Ramokgopa is also very encouraging. He's a technical person. He wants to work on evidence-based processes, but there's a lot of work that's still required on wheeling rules, particularly in municipalities. Now, in fact, in the last few days, the Tshwane municipality has published a wheeling policy, which will make wheeling possible in the Tshwane metro, like it has already become possible in the city of Cape Town, and there are a few other municipalities that are working hard at this. But again, a lot needs to be done by NERSA. And in fact, they've also recently published a paper on wheeling. It's significantly lacking in many ways. And they also really need to come to the party, if you like, in a rapidly changing technological, commercial and regulatory environment.
So a lot of work to be done, but I guess a step forward in opening up the electricity market. Brian, thanks so much for joining us today. That was SAIPPA Chairman Brian Day.